Hello, this is Associate Professor of Psychology, Rena Kirkland. I am very pleased to announce the next presentation. Seth Papineau and Kyrah Archibald will discuss their research findings from a project they did in research methods. I would like to first congratulate both of our graduating seniors for being accepted to their top choice in graduate school. Seth was accepted to Florida State's sports psychology program, and Kai was accepted to the University of Southern California's graduate program. So I'm pleased to introduce to you their presentation on the relationship between grit, psychological need satisfaction, and orientations to happiness.
Hello, everyone. My name is Seth Papineau. I'm here with my co-presenter, Kyrah Archibald, as well as our faculty advisor, Dr. Rena Kirkland, to discuss a research project regarding the relationship between grit, psychological need satisfaction, and the three orientations to happiness. This research project originally took place and was produced in the spring of 2020 because of a semester-long project in our research methods in psychology class. So in these first few slides, I'm going to define and explain these three constructs that are listed in the title slide. And then we're going to give research findings that have implications towards the current research that Kai will give later in this presentation. So first, we're going to define grit. Grit was first defined in 2007 as the passion and perseverance that one experiences when working towards achieving a long-term goal. So obviously, it's related to achievement. It's even in the definition. But when one has the passion and the perseverance and wants to work towards achieving a long-term goal, they often experience success. So it is when sustained and focused efforts, the perseverance and the passion, that one actually has grit in their life and is willing to work towards a long-term goal. So Duckworth and their colleagues also found two facets of grit, and that was the perseverance of effort and consistency of interest. So this kind of explains the perseverance and the passion that was listed in the definition. So these two facets were better predictors of success than even intelligence and cognitive ability, like IQ. Also in the research, Duckworth and her colleagues found that people that had a lot of grit had less career changes and also more self-control skills, similar to the basic psychological needs that we will explain later in this presentation. And there's also implications towards the engagement and meaning orientations to happiness that will be further explained when we start explaining orientations to happiness. So lastly, I do want to say about grit that the reasons to pursue a long-term goal there can be many reasons why one would want to pursue a long-term goal. I mean, in the field of psychology or in the field of business, there are many reasons why someone would want to dedicate their life to a career and have a lot of grit in their life. So now we will explain the basic psychological needs. Psychological needs were first explained and defined by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan when they discovered a theory that they wanted to create about motivation called the self-determination theory. So the three basic psychological needs are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And Edward Deci and Richard Ryan described and defined autonomy as the ability to make choices in your life, as well as have control in what you do. For competence, they defined it as having the ability to succeed in whatever your doings are in life. And lastly, we have relatedness. So it's the wanting, the need to feel connected and accepted to those that you are around frequently. Now we will describe three different articles that had research that included the basic psychological needs. So first, Orkibi and Ronan, they found that self-control skills, similar to grit, may satisfy the basic psychological needs. So like these donuts right here, if someone was like, okay, I don't want to have any donuts, maybe they might be more competent with themselves. They feel that they have a choice in their life and that they are willing to possess those skills and control themselves, as well as satisfy those basic psychological needs. And second, here we have Patrick and their colleagues who did research on optimal functioning and well-being, and found that those who satisfied those three basic psychological needs often function optimally, as well as possess well-being in their life. And lastly, we have two authors here in 2011 who said that the basic psychological needs are a source of motivation and well-being. So we're seeing a lot of similarities to those basic psychological needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness, as well as well-being. All right, now we will move on to the three orientations to happiness of engagement, meaning, and pleasure. And this was discovered and first defined by Kulin, Sukayama, and Duckworth in 2014, so relatively young. So first, we're going to describe the engagement orientation to happiness. So it has been defined as a state of flow in which you are working towards achieving a task, and you feel that you are very competent and concentrated in achieving that task, and very creative as well. Now we'll move on to meaning, the meaning orientation to happiness. It has been described as a heightened state of connection with yourself towards a task. And then pleasure is the satisfaction following the completion of a task. So not as much the passion and perseverance that one experiences when working towards achieving a long-term goal. It's really just the achievement of that goal, whether it was long-term or short-term. And here we have, there has been research done explaining that there is a correlation between grit and two orientations to happiness of engagement and meaning. So that was actually a very strong positive correlation between grit and engagement and meaning. And then there's also a correlation between grit and the pleasure orientation, but it was a much smaller positive correlation. Now here, this is similar to what I was just talking about, but another study found that there is a positive correlation between life satisfaction, so similar to the basic psychological needs, and the orientations to happiness. So similarly, it was higher for the engagement and meaning orientations and lower for pleasure, but they're both positive. So now those three constructs that I just explained were directly related to what our research finding was. So here, these are going to be two scales that we used in our survey that were the subjective fluctuating happiness scale and the subjective authentic durable happiness scale. These two are kind of, they're not very similar to each other. As a matter of fact, they're quite different. So one, fluctuating happiness here, as you can see, undulating effect. So that is seeing positive emotions as well as seeing deep negative emotions. And it's related to phases of pleasure. So when you're really high and experiencing positive emotions, you are going through a phase of pleasure, but then you go down to those negative emotions and experiencing quite the opposite of pleasure. And then in our last bullet here, we have, there has been found through Dambrun and their colleagues in 2012 found that there's a negative relationship between meaning and fluctuating happiness. And lastly, here we have the authentic durable happiness scale that found those that are competent in what they're doing see themselves as effective and coherent, as well as possessing meaning in their life. And this is very important because there is a possible positive relationship, which we will discuss later, between the meaning and authentic durable happiness scale, in which authentic durable happiness, it's more of a stagnant line of, or maybe not stagnant, but it is a constant line of certain emotions, not necessarily seeing very high emotions of positivity and then really low, negative emotions. So quite the opposite. We would hope that there's a possible positive relationship between meaning and this consistent happiness that one feels, whereas the subjective fluctuating happiness scale found that there was a negative correlation between meaning and an undulating effect. And now we will pass it over to Kai, who will explain our hypotheses, our results, as well as the findings of our research. Thank you so much.
For our first hypothesis, we predicted that grit would be more strongly related to the engagement and meaning orientations to happiness compared to the pleasure orientation to happiness. Specifically, grit is inversely associated with pleasure and has a small to moderate positive association with engagement and a strong positive association with meaning. Our second hypothesis was that fluctuating happiness will be positively associated with the pleasure orientation to happiness. For our methods section, we distributed an online survey to our peers, family, and friends, as well as undergraduate and graduate students of Adams State University. Our sample consisted of 119 adults, with the mean age being 37.7 years old, and 64% of that sample were female. We ran a Pearson's R to examine the relationship between grit, orientations to happiness, subjective fluctuating happiness, and basic psychological needs. Our results are important for psychologists to better understand how individuals are able to potentially obtain more engagement and achieve more satisfying life. Also, it helps us understand the influence our psychological needs has on our happiness, engagement, and life satisfaction. We found that there was a moderate positive correlation between the meaning orientation to happiness and grit, meaning that when people found more meaning in what they were doing, they experienced higher levels of grit. There was a weak positive correlation between engagement orientation to happiness and grit, suggesting that when people were somewhat engaged in what they were doing, they did experience some level of grit. There was a moderate to strong positive correlation between grit and the three psychological needs, meaning when their psychological needs were all being met, they experienced higher levels of grit. There was a negative moderate correlation between grit and subjective fluctuating happiness, meaning when someone experienced more subjective fluctuating happiness, they were less likely to experience grit. There was a negative moderate to strong correlation between psychological needs satisfaction and subjective fluctuating happiness, meaning when all of our psychological needs were being met, that individuals experienced less subjective fluctuating happiness. For our implications, the results suggest that gritty individuals tend to experience higher levels of happiness due to the engagement and meaning they experience in life. Individuals who seek happiness through pleasure are less gritty, probably because they are more likely to indulge in activities that result in immediate gratification rather than activities that contribute to an overall goal in one's life. Optimal functioning and improved well-being may be achieved through the satisfaction of psychological needs. For applications, we wanted to explore the association of visualization and grit. Visualization can be added to this research to show how it can be related to grit, psychological needs, and orientations to happiness. We also wanted to explore how collegiate student athletes can relate grit to their academic and athletic careers and see how their achievement is influenced. We also wanted to include subjective, authentic, durable happiness scale to further understand the benefits because these constructs show similarities. Some of the limitations we encountered was the demographic section. We actually left out the African and American option in our ethnic section, and I also think we could have included a written in other section for people that maybe identify as a mixed race. Also, I think we could have explored occupation and one's level of education to see if there was a relationship between grit and those two things. Like maybe grittier individuals had more prestigious occupations or they pursued higher levels of education. For self-determination theory, I don't think we focused on it as much and we didn't explain how our research supported it. And then for our limited population it wasn't technically a randomized sample because we mostly got responses from Adams State students, and we asked for them to distribute the link for our online questionnaire to their peers, which led to the snowball effect, which we didn't get a very diverse population. And also our questionnaire was a self-report survey, so social desirability bias may have played a role in it. Here's our reference section, and then thank you for your time.